Good evening, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. I'm Don Moffett from the Division of Policy and Program Development, and joining me today are
Kate Marley,
Sarah Diller, Lauren Porter.
Great. So just a few housekeeping items before we get started. If interested in accessing American Sign Language interpretation, place your cursor over the thumbnail video that you want to lock a participant in place to and select Lock this thumbnail video on a specific participant. And that's the icon that looks like a push pin. To access closed captioning, click the icon with the 3 vertical dots and click the multimedia viewer. If you're having any difficulty with accessing these services, please reach out to us through our People First Waiver mailbox, and that address is People First Waiver, all one word, at opwdd.ny.gov, and we will do our best to assist you. So just a couple of other housekeeping points before we get started. Today's session is being recorded. A copy of today's presentation will be available on OPWDD's website on the Home and Community-Based Services landing page. If you experience any connection issues during the presentation, please send an email to our People First Waiver mailbox. And again, that address is People First Waiver, and that's all one word with no spaces, at opwdd.ny.gov, and we will try to assist. Lastly, we are tracking questions, and we will have time available at the end of today's session to address them. So please feel free to submit those questions through the Q&A function. When submitting questions, please focus them on the topics we are going to cover tonight. So with that, I believe we are ready to get started. So the purpose of today's session is to review the proposed draft April 1st, 2021 Waiver Amendment of the OPWDD 1915C Comprehensive Home and Community-Based Services Waiver. Our hope is that after today's session, everyone will walk away with an understanding of what the waiver is, what the changes are, and where they can be located. So in today's presentation, we will cover where the waiver can be located, the public comment period, what is the waiver, and an overview of the proposed changes. So, where can I find the waiver? The waiver is available on the OPWDD website on the Home and Community-Based Services landing page at the address in the top box on your screen. Additionally, hard copies of the draft April 1st, 2021 Waiver Amendment are also available at each OPWDD regional office location. So this slide identifies the name and address for each regional office where hard copies of the draft waiver amendment are available. And we're going to leave this up on your screen for just a moment so that you can locate the regional office nearest to you. Okay, so when is the public comment period? The public comment period for this amendment opened earlier this week on the 10th and will run through December 18th. There are 2 ways to submit comments to OPWDD. The first way to submit comments to us is by mail. Comments can be submitted to us at the Division of Policy and Program Development, 44 Holland Avenue, Albany, New York, 12229. Or comments can be sent to us via email, and those comments can be submitted to us through our People First Waiver mailbox at People First Waiver, again, that's all one word, at opwdd.ny.gov. Okay, so what is the waiver? The waiver is New York State's agreement with our federal partners at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS. The waiver provides New York State the authority to provide HCBS waiver services. The waiver is also a collaborative effort between OPWDD and the New York State Department of Health. Department of Health administers the waiver. OPWDD operates the waiver. So, why do we need to do a waiver amendment? Well, waivers are authorized by CMS for 5-year periods. At the end of each authorized period, waivers are typically renewed. Any edits made to an initially authorized waiver are considered to be an amendment to the agreement. This waiver that we're going to be discussing tonight was renewed last year and has had 3 amendments. The last amendment was effective October 1st of this year, so October 1st, 2020. So in terms of the effective date of the waiver amendment that we're discussing tonight, we anticipate the effective date of this amendment will be April 1 of next year, so April 1st, 2021. Okay, so now let's take a look at how the waiver is organized. So the waiver has a main section and several appendices. The main section identifies the purpose and review of application, and that can be located on pages 1 through 15 of the draft document. The first appendix is Appendix A and addresses waiver administration and operation, as well as DOH and OPWDD responsibilities, and that can be found on pages 15 through 35. Appendix B discusses participant access and eligibility, as well as waiver access and eligibility processes, and that's located on pages 35 through 56. Appendix C covers participant services and includes service descriptions, including service limits and provider qualifications, and that can be found on pages 56 through 160. Appendix D covers participant-centered planning and service delivery, as well as care management, and that can be found on pages 160 through 191. Appendix E, participant direction of services or self-direction, can be found on pages 192 through 208. Okay, so the next set of sections begins with Appendix F, and Appendix F includes participant rights, as well as fair hearing, additional dispute resolution processes, and the New York State grievance and complaint system, and that's located on pages 209 through 211. Appendix G covers participant safeguards, as well as incident management, restraints and restrictive intervention, and medication management and administration. And those sections are found on pages 211 through 259. Appendix H discusses the quality improvement strategy, including New York State DOH and OPWDD internal and external processes for waiver quality improvement, and that's found on pages 259 through 267. Okay, the sections identified in this slide address fiscal elements of the waiver. So the first section that really delves into the fiscal pieces is Appendix I, and Appendix I covers fiscal accountability and waiver audit procedures, and that's found on pages 267 through 291. Appendix J discusses the cost neutrality demonstration, as well as fiscal projections for fee-for-service and managed care. and those items are found on pages 291 through 315. The last section of the waiver application is Addendum A, and Addendum A outlines the rate methodology language for waiver services, and this is found on pages 316 through 386 and includes methodology attachments which are known as Addendum A1 through A5, and those are found on pages 387 through 406. So at this point, we have discussed what the waiver is, where it can be found, and the specifics of the public comment period. Now, let's take a look at the proposed changes. So the primary purpose of this waiver amendment is to address temporary flexibilities authorized in the approved Appendix K, which is slated to end in March. However, given the fluid nature of the public health emergency and uncertainty of when the public health emergency will end, OPWDD is trying to be proactive in securing flexibilities that have proven effective on a more permanent basis. So, the first two changes are related to temporary flexibilities authorized under the Appendix K Emergency Amendment related to the COVID-19 public health emergency. Again, these are currently temporary flexibilities that OPWDD is seeking to make permanent. The first item is related to community habilitation, and it's community habilitation residential. This would allow for the delivery of community habilitation within OPWDD certified residences on weekdays with a start time before 3 p.m. Safeguards here include, but are not limited to, the person's choice of the service in this setting. Language related to this change can be found in Appendix C of the draft amendment on pages 71 and 72 and page 106. The second change is related to telehealth service delivery and proposes to allow the several services listed here to be delivered via telehealth modalities pursuant to state and federal policies. Again, safeguards include but are not limited to the person's choice of the service and delivery method. Language related to this change is consistent across each service and can be found on the pages identified in this slide. And we can leave that slide up for just a moment so that folks have an opportunity to write down the page numbers if interested. Okay, so let's move forward. Our last operational policy change is related to the availability of crisis services for individuals with intellectual or developmental disabilities, or CSIDD. And this is for people who live in certified residences. Again, CSIDD stands for Crisis Services for Individuals with Intellectual or Developmental Disabilities. You may remember this as START. START was kind of the precursor to what we're now referring to as CSIDD. So this change applies to the intensive respite service definition to allow individuals who live in OPWDD certified residences to access intensive respite from a CSIDD resource center. This action is limited to CSIDD resource center services to address the crisis needs of the person living in a certified residence who is receiving CSIDD services. For supervised residences, during the person's stay, the time spent at the resource center can be counted toward the available retainer day limit and paid at the provider's retainer day rate. Language related to this change can be found in Appendix C on pages 71 and 72 and page 78. Okay. That kind of concludes the overview of the policy and operational type changes included in this waiver action. There is one kind of minor technical fiscal change being included in this amendment. Okay, so the one fiscal update that we're proposing related to this amendment is we are looking to extend the July 1st, 2021 target completion date for the following rate setting actions, and we are anticipating extending that from July 1st, 2021 to October 1st, 2021. So we're looking to extend that by about 3 months. So the items covered on this extension would be a new overnight respite reimbursement methodology, use of the Coordinated Assessment System, or CAS, for calculations and funding for people with higher needs, and new personal resource allocation calculations. So just to note here that there are no other anticipated or proposed changes to self-direction as a result of this amendment, other than extending the time frame for new PRA resource calculations. The language related to these changes can be found in Appendix C and Addendum A on the pages noted in the slide. So just to be clear, the only change being proposed here is to the effective dates at this time. We're not proposing any methodology changes in these areas. This is simply an extension of the existing dates, as we're not 100% sure that we're ready to move forward with those actions at this time. So we are anticipating we'll be in a better position to address those items in October. So that's really the content of the waiver amendment. That's really what we're hoping to address here. And that brings us to the end of the presentation. So a link to a recording of today's presentation will be available shortly on the OPWDD website at the identified link on your slide. Please feel free to direct any comments to us at the People First Waiver mailbox address. And again, that's People First Waiver, all one word, at opwdd.ny.gov. So we're now going to pause for just a moment to kind of pull together and review any questions that we have received. We're going to put you on hold for just a minute while we collect those questions, and we will be back with you momentarily.
So, hello everyone, this is Kate Marley. We've had a couple questions related to the date change and new methodologies. So I just want to reiterate what Don was talking about. All we are doing in this action is moving out a time frame that was already established with CMS that required that we take certain actions by July. We are now acknowledging that given where we are with COVID, it's just not achievable to do that in July. Those dates are being moved out to October. So there's no changes in terms of the methodology. In this particular action, the date is being moved out to incorporate those actions that we described, which was the higher needs funding, a relook at the respite methodology, and an evaluation of the PRA. What I will say at this point is there is not a methodology established for the PRA, for example. I know there were some concerns that, what that would look like. We do not have a methodology, so we cannot talk about what that will look like, but obviously that's an important topic and will be subject to lots of engagement and public hearing as we roll out those changes, but that is not incorporated in this particular action. We also had some questions, I think probably from a provider, about Appendix K flexibility. And again, that is the Appendix K are the emergency provisions that we have access to during during the public health emergency, and we are not going to be discussing that today because that's really not the subject of today's webinar. So we can certainly address individual questions regarding Appendix K and operations through our People First mailbox, and we're happy to do so. But we would ask that you direct questions related to operations under the emergency Appendix K to the mailbox.
A question we received regarding community habilitation. Are there any new stipulations in place for people who live in a OPWDD certified residence who would like to receive or are currently receiving community habilitation?
So, again, where we are right now is that services are occurring under the Appendix K, so there are plenty of people that are receiving community habilitation in the residence right now. In most instances, that's because people could not attend day habilitation or pre-vocational services. What we're doing here is to try to make that option available after the emergency for people who live in residences. What we are requiring is that the person wants to receive the service, wants to receive it in that setting, and that it's appropriate for them. So there would be an evaluation of the need for that service in the residence if that's what the person desires.
We received a question about how many CAS assessments have been completed to this point.
That's not information that I have on hand. I know there has been extensive work on the CAS, and that's something that we can certainly provide a link to information and get back to folks on it, but we don't have that information handy.
In regard to telehealth services for community habilitation, is it anticipated that in the future a combination use of telehealth and face-to-face services will be expected?
That's a great question. I think what we are anticipating here is that it may be useful for some people in certain circumstances to receive that. I don't think any of us expect nor would accept that an entire service would only be delivered remotely. That seems to me very unlikely and probably not in the best interest of the individual served. But where it is appropriate and where the person benefits from that mode of service delivery, we would like that to be an option. But by no means do we think that that is necessarily appropriate for every person, and certainly not something that should happen, outside of, carefully planned and appropriately delivered services.
We have a question regarding an individual individuals who live in certified residences but are currently in their family member's home due to the COVID pandemic. Are there any services that the residential provider can provide?
Certainly. I think if there are individuals who are with their families because of COVID-19, they should certainly reach out to the care manager and the residential provider and to work with them about the kinds of supports that can be rendered. But that's a very obviously individual situation that would have to be addressed on that. At that level.
We have received a couple of questions about what year will be used as the base year for provider agencies. We are asking that if you have questions regarding that topic to please send it into the People First Waiver mailbox so that we can follow up on your question. We received a question if there is a reduction of community hab hours for self-direction.
The answer is no. There is no change to the self-direction methodology whatsoever in this amendment.
We received some questions about if housing subsidies will remain a part of self-direction.
So there's nothing in this amendment that would affect housing subsidies. Housing subsidies are available to people in self-direction and people outside of self-direction, so it's not solely within self-direction. And that is a service that is, or a funding source that the state provides. So just to be clear, it's really not part of the HCBS waiver, but there are no changes certainly in this document and none that we are aware of.
Can people who live in their own or private home get community habilitation before 3 p.m.?
So that's a great question, and the answer is yes. The limitation of services starting before 3 o'clock on weekdays is solely for people who live in certified residences, and that's because there's expectations in the residential funding about staffing and the provision of services on weekday evenings and weekends. But there is no limitation for folks who live at home in terms of time of day or day of the week.
Can community habilitation services be used during school hours?
So that's a frequently asked question, and the answer is no. Community habilitation cannot be delivered during school hours. So what that means is if a child is attending school, child or young adult is attending school at the school building, community habilitation cannot be provided in the school setting. If a child is engaged in remote learning, community habilitation cannot be providing support during that time that remote learning is happening. There is flexibility. Community hab can be provided during the day for a school-aged child at home, just not simultaneously with the educational services. There is a policy statement for OPWDD, the Department of Health, and all the child-serving agencies regarding the provision of HCBS and school-age services. That is available on the OPWDD site and the DOH site. What can be provided are certain state plan services can be provided simultaneously with school services, and that is an option for children and young adults who are engaged in school and need support during remote learning.
Does this waiver amendment allow respite services to be delivered in a hospital setting?
No, there's nothing in this amendment that would allow respite services to be delivered in a hospital setting.
Can you explain what the respite methodology changes are in this amendment?
So just to be clear, there are no changes being made in this amendment to the methodology for respite. What is changing is there is a requirement in our existing waiver. So prior to this amendment, we were required to look at our overnight respite methodology. CMS had prior to this required that that be inserted in the waiver. And the due date, if you will, for that action to look at the overnight funding methodology was July 2021. We are now extending that deadline until October, but there is at this point no changes to the methodology for overnight respite services.
Can you clarify what services can be provided to a child during remote learning?
So let's start at the beginning. There's sort of two main classes of services that we're talking about here. There are state plan services, which are Medicaid services that are available to everybody who is enrolled in Medicaid who meets what they call medical necessity. So you have to need the service, but if you need the service, you can get the service. Then the other kind of services that we're talking about here tonight are called Home and Community-Based Services, HCBS waiver services. Waiver services are different in that they are only available to people who are enrolled in the waiver. HCBS services cannot be provided simultaneously to educational services. However, there are state plan services that may be appropriate to support a child if they meet the medical necessity criteria for the service. Most typically, that would probably be personal care services that could be provided to an individual, assuming that they have an appropriate need for the service. That is something that can be provided simultaneously with remote educational services.
A question was asked about state-paid self-direction services and if those are described in this waiver.
No, state-paid services would not be described in the waiver agreement because those would not be waiver services. So there's no participation by CMS in the funding, therefore it would not be described in this waiver.
And just to clarify, that is in regards to OTPS and Family Reimbursed Respite, or FRR.
So those types of services are not funded through the HCBS waiver. They're funded with 100% state dollars. Therefore, they are not described in this amendment.
Are day habilitation services still allowed to be delivered in group homes?
So day habilitation services can be provided in residences, and that is certainly happening now in relation to the pandemic, and that is allowable.
We have a question come in about family reimbursed respite funding. If you could please send that question to the People First Waiver mailbox so we can follow up on the guidance on that question for you, that'd be greatly appreciated. Okay, no additional questions have come in at this time. Thank you everyone for taking the time out of your evening to join us today. If you have additional questions after this session, please feel free to reach out to us at the People First Waiver mailbox, which is shown on the slide in front of you. It's People First Waiver, all one word, at OPWDD.ny.gov. Thank you all again, and take care.